Hi, I'm Elise. My sister once looked at a gift I made by hand and laughed, called it cheap in front of everyone. But that wasn't the worst part. The real blow? She planned her dream wedding in the house we inherited together, while secretly trying to take my name off the deed. I wasn't just excluded. I was being erased. Ever been the one who stayed quiet to keep the peace, only to realize they counted on that silence to take everything from you? What would you do if your own family treated you like a footnote? Let me tell you what I did. The house didn't smell like home anymore. It had the same cedarwood beams, the same whitewashed porch, but the air inside was different. Overly floral, too polished, like it had something to prove. Someone had lit candles that smelled like lavender mixed with citrus. Celeste's idea of elegance. I hadn't been in that house in months, maybe longer. And today, I wasn't there to feel nostalgic. I was there because my name was still on the deed, even if it had long since been erased from conversation. The front door was already open when I walked up. Guests floated in and out, all pastels and polished shoes, holding glasses that clinked even when no one said anything meaningful. I stepped inside, holding the small wrapped box close to my chest, trying not to crush the ribbon I'd tied that morning. "There you are," Celeste said, sweeping toward me like a designer storm cloud. "Perfect timing. We were just about to toast." She kissed the air beside my cheek, already pulling away before my hand could settle on her shoulder. Her voice dropped to a hush. "Try not to make it awkward, okay?" I gave a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Wouldn't dream of it." People were standing in small groups, every conversation sprinkled with name-dropping and wedding talk. I spotted Nolan near the back of the room, holding a glass of something with bubbles. He nodded politely at me, but the kind of nod you give someone you've heard about, not someone you know. My palms were starting to sweat. I gripped the box tighter. "Let's do presents now," someone chirped. Vanessa, maybe. Celeste's friend from college, who once said my art looked very emotionally brave. Celeste clapped her hands and motioned toward the side table, now covered in glossy gift bags and envelopes with metallic script. "Start with the small one," she said, her gaze landing on my box with the kind of smile that doesn't belong on a face but in a mirror. I stepped forward and placed it in her hands. "I made it myself," I said, my voice steady. "Oh?" She blinked at me like I'd said I'd built a house out of toothpicks. She peeled the paper back and opened the lid. Inside was a hand-stitched embroidery piece, our family tree, down to the details. I'd worked on it for weeks, matching thread colors to old photos, choosing a frame that wouldn't overwhelm the stitches. Every name had been placed with care, even hers. She stared at it. Her lips twitched. "Oh my," she said, then looked up at the room. "This looks so cheap." The words hit harder than they should have. The room broke into a light ripple of laughter. Polite, restrained, but loud enough. Nolan let out a half chuckle, then sipped his drink to hide the rest. Celeste shook her head with mock pity. "You know there's a registry, right? But this is sweet, I guess." I said nothing, just nodded and stepped back. My face felt hot, my ears ringing, but I kept that smile glued on like armor. I spotted a couple exchanging glances, clearly unsure if they were witnessing a joke or something meaner. The embroidery lay on the table, sideways, the frame catching too much light. A few minutes later, Celeste clinked her glass. "I just want to say thank you all for being here. This home, this legacy, has been in our family for generations. My mother, my grandmother, even great-grandmother stood on these floors. And now, I get to start a new chapter here, with the man I love." She raised her glass. "To family tradition." Everyone toasted. Except me. Because I knew what wasn't said. The part where I'd helped save this house after Dad passed, when Celeste didn't return my calls until the probate lawyer said it might get liquidated. The part where I'd cashed out my retirement to cover back taxes, while she was off at a yoga retreat in Sedona. But sure. Legacy. My name didn't come up once, not when she spoke of generations, Not when she thanked everyone for their support. I could have been a guest, or a caterer, or a mistake someone forgot to uninvite. She finished her toast, Nolan kissed her cheek, and the crowd clapped like they'd just watched a trailer for something they didn't plan to see. I stood in the hallway for a moment, just long enough to feel the space shrink around me. No one turned. No one noticed when I left. I walked back to my car with the keys already in hand. When I shut the door, the sound felt louder than it should have, like closing something that couldn't be opened again. I didn't cry. That would have been too easy. I didn't yell. That would have let her win. I just sat there, staring through the windshield, looking at the house I once called mine. Not by ownership, but by memory. And for the first time in my life, I didn't want to walk back inside. By the time I got back to my apartment, the sun had already dipped below the rooftops. The heat of the day clung to the sidewalks, like it refused to let go. But inside my place, it was quiet. Too quiet. I kicked off my flats near the door and placed the untouched slice of engagement cake on the counter. I hadn't had the appetite for it at the party, and I still didn't now. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the sink and stood there for a moment, unsure what to do with myself. The kind of silence that doesn't just sit in a room, it sinks into your chest. A breeze nudged the curtains near the back window, and I could hear the faint rumble of a car somewhere down the block. My phone buzzed, but I didn't look at it. I already knew it wasn't Celeste, or Mom, or anyone that would say what I needed to hear. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop, more out of habit than anything else. A notification popped up. Celeste had shared the party video link with the family group thread. The subject line read, "For the memories?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but my curiosity got the better of me. Maybe, just maybe, I'd be in it. Maybe she remembered something that mattered. I clicked play. It opened with a sweeping shot of the house, the camera moving through each freshly polished room, soft piano music playing under the footage. The next frame jumped to Celeste and Dad, fishing off the dock, back when we still had the lake house. Then her prom, her first wedding, her graduation. Our mother hugging her tightly outside a church. Not once did I appear. I watched the entire thing, 7 minutes, 23 seconds, and my face never showed up. Not in the group photos, not in the candids, not even in the background. I refreshed the page. Thought maybe it was an error. Maybe there was a second video. I searched the link history. Nothing. She'd curated a history that erased me completely. Like I was a footnote she'd decided wasn't relevant anymore. I leaned back in my chair, blinking hard. Not because I was going to cry, but because my eyes had dried out from staring too long without moving. My phone buzzed again. A message this time, from the planner probably. I ignored it. When I went to put the laptop away, I noticed something under the pile of mail on the entryway table. A tri-folded brochure, creamy paper with gold embossing. It looked like something printed for a museum. At the bottom, in elegant serif font, "The Catherine Legacy Home, preserved by Celeste and family." I stared at it for a moment before flipping it open. Inside was a narrative, more polished than truthful, about the remarkable women of the Catherine line, with Celeste listed as the current steward of the estate. No mention of me, not even in the smallest print. There was a page on family contributions, too. Grandfather's military record, Celeste's charity events, my mother's civic awards. Again, nothing about the years I handled the estate taxes or the summer I refinished the floors myself when we couldn't afford contractors. All of it vanished, overwritten. I pressed the brochure flat against the table and ran my hand across it like it might change under my touch. It didn't. Instead, a memory surfaced, uninvited. I was 18. Celeste had just graduated college, and Mom had thrown her a big party in the backyard. The day after, I stayed behind to clean. Scrubbed the grill, hosed down the patio, threw out soggy paper plates. Later that night, I opened the fridge and found a small cake box shoved to the back. "Happy birthday, Elise!" written in faint icing, tilted from the car ride over. No candle, no card. That night, I told myself maybe they were just tired. Maybe they forgot the date. Maybe I hadn't reminded them enough. That's how it starts. The excuses you build to make silence feel less cruel. I looked at the brochure again. The story she'd built, the version of our family she'd handed out to vendors and friends, and probably emailed to investors as some charming backstory. She'd cut me out without ever lifting a pair of scissors. I closed the laptop gently and set it aside. My hands didn't shake. I wasn't angry, at least not in the traditional sense. What I felt was deeper, like realizing a photo had been doctored and you were the part edited out. I got up, pulled a fresh notepad from the drawer, and sat back down at the table. I opened to a blank page and began writing dates, memories, names. Not for anyone else, just for me. The time I met with the estate lawyer, the checks I wrote, the times I called the roofer, the weekend I drove 6 hours to get a deal on reclaimed wood for the downstairs hallway. I didn't need anyone to validate it, but I also didn't want to forget that it happened. They say history belongs to those who write it, so I started writing mine. The next morning, I woke up with a stiffness that had nothing to do with sleep. It settled somewhere between my shoulders, a quiet tension I couldn't stretch out. I made coffee, not because I wanted it, but because routine gives the illusion of order. My spoon clinked against the side of the mug louder than usual, or maybe it just felt that way in the silence. By late morning, I'd talked myself into driving over to Mom's. I packed some chicken soup in a glass container and wrapped it in a towel like I'd done so many Sundays before. Her apartment wasn't far, just a 15-minute drive across town. But today, it felt like heading towards something I couldn't quite name. When she opened the door, she smiled like she hadn't forgotten anything. Like last night's party hadn't happened. "Oh, Elise, come in," she said, stepping aside. I kissed her cheek and handed her the soup. She set it down on the counter and walked into the living room as if I wasn't standing there holding a conversation starter in my hands. I followed her slowly. She turned on the TV, some home renovation show where perfect strangers fixed other people's problems with sledgehammers and tile samples. We sat in that manufactured comfort for a few minutes before I cleared my throat. "I didn't stay long last night," I said, as neutrally as I could manage. She didn't look over. "It was lovely, wasn't it? Celeste really knows how to put on a show." A show. That was exactly what it was. I nodded slightly. It felt a little distant. That got her attention, barely. "Well, your sister has a lot on her plate right now. You know how she is, wants everything just right." "I noticed," I said, then paused. "I guess I just wasn't expecting to be left out of so much." She sighed. A long, practiced exhale. "Elise, sometimes it's better to let things go. Don't make this about you. It was her night." There it was. The line I'd heard more ways than I could count. Don't make this about you. The unspoken mantra of being the second daughter, the quieter one, the one who fills the cracks, but doesn't get her name carved into the stone. I forced a smile. "Of course." She patted my hand like I was being overly sensitive. "You've always been the strong one." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how often strength is used as a reason to ignore someone's absence. Later, while rinsing our dishes at the sink, I noticed a few papers tucked under her recipe stand. The top one had been folded in half, like someone meant to put it away but got distracted. I didn't mean to read it, at least not at first, but a phrase caught my eye. House Design and Problem Management. The email was a forwarded chain. Celeste had sent it to her wedding planner, and Mom had printed it. Why, I didn't know. The message read, "Don't worry about Elise. She's always been the quiet one. We'll manage her." Manage me. Like I was a spreadsheet, a pothole, a tricky headline in a family press release. I folded the email back the way I found it, my hands steady, but my chest hollowing out slowly, like a balloon losing air in a room where no one hears the hiss. We chatted for a little while longer, about the neighbor's cat, her latest book club pick. But I wasn't there anymore. When I got home, I placed the folded email next to my laptop. It sat there for a few minutes before I opened the shoebox in the closet. Inside were old cards and photos I hadn't looked through in years. One envelope, yellowed at the edges, had my name in Dad's handwriting. I opened it carefully. It was the card he gave me when I graduated college. I'd forgotten the words until I read them again. "You are the soul of this family, even if no one says it out loud." I sat there for a while, holding it between my fingers like it might fall apart if I let go. Then I pulled out a manila folder and labeled it, "In case I forget my worth." Inside, I placed the email, then the card, then the photo of me sanding the stairs back in 2009, the summer the house almost fell apart, and no one else had time to care. I didn't intend to use any of it, not yet. But something in me had shifted. Not a scream, not a fight, just a turning of the lock. They weren't preparing to confront me. They were preparing to erase me before I noticed it was happening. So I started preparing too. I didn't sleep much that night. It wasn't insomnia exactly, more like my mind kept pacing even while my body stayed still. Around 4 in the morning, I finally gave up, made a cup of tea, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the manila folder I'd labeled the night before. By mid-morning, the sun was fully up, and the air had that heaviness Charleston carries before it decides whether to rain or just smother you with heat. I pulled out an old address book I hadn't touched in years. Flipping through the pages, I found Marshall's name still written in my father's blocky print. Marshall Reed, James's attorney, estate affairs, trustworthy, private. The note beside it wasn't mine. Dad must have written that sometime before everything went sideways. I called the number. It rang twice before an older male voice picked up. "Reed Law Office." "Hi, this is Elise Catherine. I was wondering if Marshall Reed still practices." There was a pause, then a quiet chuckle. "Well, I'd certainly hope so, since you're speaking to him." I smiled despite myself. "Mr. Reed, I'm James's daughter." "Elise." "Of course." His tone shifted, warmth under control. "I haven't heard from your family in, over a decade?" "I know it's been a while," I said, fingers pressing the side of my mug. "I was hoping to meet, to ask a few questions." There was a pause, but not a hesitant one. "James always said you were the one who paid attention. Come by the office this afternoon if you can." By 2 o'clock, I was in his waiting room. It smelled like leather and lemon polish, the kind of place that hadn't changed decor since 1995, and wore that fact with pride. Marshall stepped out from his office and gestured me in. He looked older, his silver hair now entirely white, but his eyes were sharp. "I was sorry to hear about your father," he said as we sat. "Thank you. What can I help you with, Elise?" I pulled the folder from my bag and placed it on the table between us. "I just need to know what my rights are, regarding the house." He nodded, stood, and walked to a filing cabinet behind him. He didn't need to look hard. He knew exactly where to go. He returned with a thick envelope and opened it slowly. "Your father was meticulous. He made sure everything was clearly outlined." He laid out a page in front of me. "Original deed, signed by your father. Ownership split 50-50 between you and Celeste." I stared at the page. My name, typed clean and official, stared back at me like a long-lost relative. It didn't just confirm I had a stake. It confirmed I'd been lied to for years. Marshall tapped the corner of the document. He insisted both daughters had equal stake. I remember him saying, "Celeste may be the star, but Elise is the spine." My throat tightened, but I didn't let it show. I nodded once. "There's more," he said, pulling out a separate sheet. "This came in 2 years ago, a request to transfer the deed into sole ownership, Celeste's name only." He passed it to me. The county clerk's response was stapled behind it. "Request denied. Missing co-owner signature." She tried to cut me out. And failed. I didn't say a word for a full minute. Marshall watched me with the patience of someone used to long silences and heavy truths. "Is it possible to sell my half?" I asked finally. He leaned back. "You can sell the whole thing. Both names are still valid. You're not tied to her consent unless a new contract supersedes this, which it doesn't." I nodded slowly. "I'd like certified copies." "Of course." He moved to the printer, and I took a breath. The kind you take when the air has weight, and you finally have enough strength to push against it. When he returned, I stood to leave. He handed me the envelope and said, "Your father would have wanted you to have this, and not just because of paperwork." I nodded again, this time softer. "Thank you." As I stepped out onto the street, the sun had dimmed behind a veil of clouds. The light was still there, but muted, like it knew not everything needed to shine to be seen. I looked down at the envelope in my hands. She'd built an entire world pretending I didn't matter, and yet here it was, in ink and official seals, proof I hadn't just mattered, I had rights. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't thrown a single punch, but I had the one thing that couldn't be ignored. Paper doesn't lie. It had been a week since I left Marshall's office with that envelope in my hands. 7 days of silence, of holding a piece of truth I hadn't shared with anyone, not because I was scared, but because power tastes different when you don't rush to use it. That Tuesday, I decided to visit the house. No text, no call. Just me, showing up under the pretense of checking in. After all, no one had officially told me I couldn't. The door code hadn't been changed. That alone told me everything. Inside, the place looked more like a showroom than a home. Soft jazz hummed from ceiling speakers. There were fresh flowers, white hydrangeas, Celeste's favorite, placed strategically around the rooms. The kitchen had been staged, with fake croissants on a white plate and a bottle of wine I knew neither of us ever drank. I stood there for a moment, absorbing it all. The wallpaper we'd chosen after Dad passed had been replaced. Light gray now, with gold accents. Very bridal magazine. Very not us. I wandered further in, slowly, my footsteps muffled by the new rugs. On the counter sat several design catalogs, fabric samples, and a stack of sticky notes with Ivana's handwriting. The wedding planner. Her bag was tossed casually on one of the dining chairs, as if she lived here now. I didn't touch a thing, not until I reached the stairs and looked up toward the second floor. My old room. It felt strange walking those steps again, like visiting a memory someone else had tried to rewrite. The door to my room was closed. I turned the handle and stepped inside. The walls were painted a sterile cream. My bookshelf was gone. The closet was filled with clear bins labeled coats, centerpieces, and emergency heels. On the wall was a taped copy of the floor plan. In red ink, guest coat room. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. This wasn't anger. This was confirmation. They had taken the one room that had still carried my shape and turned it into a closet for strangers. I walked back downstairs, and as I passed the front hall, I noticed an envelope with my name written on it. Handwritten, but not by anyone who cared. I opened it, thinking maybe, just maybe, it was a note, an apology, a conversation starter. It was a misdelivery. Inside were wedding planning notes. Celeste's notes, addressed to Ivana. My name came up only once. Feel free to remodel all areas except the front parlor and dining room. That's where the guests will take photos. Elise doesn't really use the upstairs anymore. I took a picture of the page with my phone, then folded the papers neatly and slid them back into the envelope. Let them think I never saw it. Let them keep assuming I was still asleep. On the way out, I didn't slam the door. I didn't leave a note. I simply walked to my car, started the engine, and let the heat from the windshield soak into my skin while I sat and thought. Back at my apartment, I made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. I'd been putting it off, not because I wasn't ready, but because I knew that once I started, there'd be no going back. I pulled up a browser, typed slowly, and found a contact form for a local private realtor. One I'd met once years ago when helping a friend relocate. They specialized in historic homes and confidential listings. In the inquiry box, I wrote, "Waterfront property, historic, motivated seller, discretion essential." I didn't name the address, not yet. But I knew they'd call. Homes like ours didn't sit long, not in Charleston, not with a backyard that kissed the marsh. When I hit send, I didn't feel guilt, I didn't feel fear, I felt calm. They had repurposed my room, my history, my presence, but they had no idea I'd already started repurposing the house. Not to get even, to get free. 3 days passed with no word from Celeste. No calls. No carefully worded emails. No surprise knock at the door. And I knew that silence wasn't peace. It was calculation. She was either pretending nothing had happened or planning her next move. I wasn't sure which was worse. On Thursday morning, I was steeping tea when the doorbell rang. It wasn't a neighbor or a package. It was Celeste. She stood on my front porch in white linen, her arms folded like she was about to deliver a warning, not a greeting. Behind her, Ivana lingered a few steps back, sunglasses still on despite the overcast sky. "Open the door, Elise," Celeste said, tight-lipped. "We need to talk." I didn't invite them in. I simply stepped aside. She took that as permission and breezed past me like she still owned the house and the air inside it. The planner followed, awkward and silent, clutching a sleek leather portfolio like it might shield her from the tension crackling in the room. "I got a call," Celeste began, turning to face me once I'd closed the door. "From someone in real estate. Said the house was being quietly marketed. Can you explain to me why my wedding venue is being listed behind my back?" I stayed calm. "Have you looked at the deed lately?" Celeste blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" I walked to the hallway table, opened a drawer, and pulled out the certified copy Marshall had given me. I held it out without a word. She didn't take it, so I laid it gently on the entryway table between us. "Half of that house belongs to me," I said evenly. "Legally. Still. Always has." Ivana looked between us, clearly re-evaluating whether she should have come. Celeste crossed her arms. "This is petty, Elise. You're going to ruin everything over some technicality? This is my wedding." "No," I said. "This is our family home, and you're turning it into a photo shoot. That's not fair." "Neither is being erased," she scoffed. "You're being dramatic." I tilted my head slightly. "You're being entitled." We stood there in silence for a moment that stretched thin as wire. Then the door opened again. Nolan walked in, keys still in his hand. He stopped short when he saw all of us there. Celeste mid-argument, Ivana shifting uncomfortably, and me holding my ground. "I didn't realize there was a meeting," he said carefully. Celeste composed herself in seconds. "We were just clearing something up." Nolan turned to me. "Is this about the house?" I nodded once. Celeste interjected, her voice syrupy. "It's just a misunderstanding." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "It's not complicated," I said, handing Nolan the same document. "It's documented." He read silently. His expression didn't change much, but his eyes stopped on my name. Printed, legal, real. "You're co-owner?" he asked, more to confirm than question. "Yes," I answered, and she tried to transfer full ownership without my signature. The clerk denied it. Celeste's face hardened. "Why are you doing this? Out of spite?" "No," I said. "Out of necessity." Ivana finally broke her silence. "Should I step out?" "No," I replied, keeping my eyes on Celeste. "You might as well hear it." I turned slightly, my voice steady but colder now. "I've watched you claim credit for everything, from family history to this house to my silence. But here's the truth. You can't stage a wedding in a house you don't legally control. And you certainly don't get to erase me and expect me to stay quiet while you make a grand entrance on the very floorboards I paid to fix." Celeste laughed bitterly. "You've always had a flair for martyrdom." "No," I said. "I've just learned that being quiet doesn't mean being invisible, and I don't need your approval to matter." Nolan didn't say a word, but he folded the paper and handed it back to me, not her. That said more than any speech could. Celeste looked at him, then back at me, eyes sharp but uncertain. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. She turned on her heel and left without saying another word. Ivana hesitated. "We'll be in touch," she said softly, before following her out the door. When it shut behind them, the house fell silent again. But this time, the silence wasn't hollow. This time, I'd filled it. I stayed in the foyer for a while after the door closed, listening to the echo of Celeste's heels fading down the steps, like thunder finally moving off in the distance. I didn't move, didn't sit, didn't even exhale. I'd said what needed to be said. The words hung in the air like smoke after a match strike. Not hot, not angry, just lingering truth. By the next morning, I had confirmation that our quiet battle had become a full-blown war. The envelope came via overnight courier. A pale gray folder inside bore the crest of a downtown law firm Celeste had used before, when she sued an old business partner for breach of contract and won. She didn't believe in consequences unless she was the one delivering them. Inside was a formal demand for mediation. "Disputed use of shared property," it said. I scanned the lines quickly. "Cease all sales activity, suspend the listing, refrain from contacting realtors or potential buyers." There was no signature from Celeste, but her fingerprints were all over it. Before I had time to digest it, my phone buzzed. "Hi, is this Elise Catherine?" a familiar voice asked. It was Marcy from the realty firm. "I just wanted to give you a heads up. We got a call this morning, someone claiming you didn't have legal authority to list the property. We've paused things for now." Of course she did. The same woman who ignored every bill I paid, every repair I made, now suddenly remembered we shared something. I thanked Marcy, told her I'd be in touch soon, then hung up. It took less than 24 hours for Celeste to strike, but I was done being caught off guard. That afternoon, I drove to my doctor's office. I'd known Dr. Ellis for over a decade. We didn't talk often, but he'd seen me through a few surgeries and an early cancer scare. He didn't ask why I needed a cognitive evaluation on paper. He just did it. When he handed over the notarized letter confirming my mental fitness and decision-making ability, he didn't press for details. "Just in case," I told him. He nodded once. "Some families don't understand quiet strength until it refuses to sit down." From there, I drove straight to Marshall's office downtown. I handed him the legal packet, the evaluation letter, and a copy of my response. "Do not let them make this about my stability," I told him. "She'll try to spin this as me unraveling. I want it clear and on record. I know exactly what I'm doing." Marshall flipped through the documents, his eyes narrowing. "She's playing hardball," he muttered, "but she overreached. Then let's show her what happens when she plays that way with the wrong sister." That night, I didn't sleep again. But it wasn't anxiety this time. It was clarity. Focused. Clean. The next morning, as I sat on the porch sipping coffee, Silas pulled into the driveway. I hadn't called him. I didn't need to. He stepped out of his truck with a thin binder under his arm, and the same quiet determination I remembered from the day he helped me move out of my college apartment in a single afternoon, never asking for help, never expecting thanks. "I figured you'd need this," he said, handing over the file. Inside were archived property records from the city, every tax payment, maintenance receipt, and property upkeep bill under my name since Dad passed. 12 years worth. "In case they try to paint you like a visitor," he said. I looked up at him, my throat tight. "They always thought I wouldn't fight back." He shrugged. "They don't know you like I do." Marshall called 2 days later. "She's backing off," he said plainly. The documentation was clear. Her lawyer didn't expect that kind of preparation. "And the house?" I asked. "Still yours. The listing can resume. The venue is now legally compromised. Her contracts won't hold." I hung up the phone and set it gently on the table. I didn't cheer. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady, like someone who had been leaning too long and finally found solid footing again. A few hours later, I got a message from an old family friend, Karen from Dad's side, the kind who called everyone Han and always wore too much perfume. Elise, I don't mean to pry, but Celeste's saying you've been having episodes, that you might be making impulsive decisions. Is everything okay? I closed my eyes and took a breath before replying. Everything is exactly as it should be, Karen, but thank you for checking. The first domino had fallen. She didn't just lose a house, she lost the script. By the time Saturday rolled around, the weather had turned almost mockingly perfect. Bright skies, no humidity, just enough breeze to make the marsh sparkle. It was supposed to be her day, Celeste's day, the one she had curated down to the scent of the soap in the guest bathrooms. Instead, the venue stood locked, cold, and completely silent. I wasn't there, but word traveled quickly. Guests began arriving around noon, some confused, others irritated. There were murmurs in the group chats, messages sent to coordinators, a few attempted calls to vendors. All went unanswered. Around 12:47 p.m., the planner sent out a text blast to every guest number on file. Due to an unforeseen legal complication with the venue, today's event is postponed. We deeply apologize for the inconvenience. That was it. No explanation, no relocation, just gone. I heard about it first from Silas, who had been walking past the venue on his way to meet a client nearby. He called me, not out of curiosity, but with a tone I hadn't heard from him since our 20s, measured, tight with something like disbelief. They were unloading flower arrangements when they got the word. The truck turned around. You should have seen Celeste's face. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want them. By late afternoon, the hashtags had started. Nothing massive, just enough to leave a digital bruise. Wedding fail, shattered venue gate, Shark Celeste crisis. A few boutique blogs picked it up by evening. A headline read, High-profile Charleston PR exec's wedding implodes over property dispute. The article mentioned an undisclosed legal error involving co-ownership. My name wasn't in it. Neither was hers. But the locals knew. And in a city like this, reputation moves faster than traffic. I stayed in. Cooked dinner without the TV on. Washed dishes slower than usual. Every now and then, I'd glance at my phone, not because I expected a call from her, but because part of me still lived with the reflex of waiting. Around 6:30, a family friend texted me. Was the venue situation really that serious? I replied. It was that real. Meanwhile, Celeste had apparently tried to salvage what she could by hosting a small reception at a nearby hotel lounge. Photos showed up online. A charcuterie spread, a champagne tower that looked sad without context, and guests dressed for an event that had already evaporated. One photo caught my eye. A framed embroidery sitting on a display table near the guest book. It was the one I'd made, the family tree. The same one she'd laughed at weeks ago, called cheap, in front of a room full of people. I stared at the image, squinting to see if the stitching was still intact after being mishandled. Under the picture, someone had commented, So sweet and personal. Celeste, did you make that? And there it was. Her reply, casual as a shrug. Oh no, that's from Elise. Just a little crafty thing she does. Etsy vibes. Etsy vibes. She didn't have to smear me anymore. She could just reduce me to something novelty level, an accessory to her aesthetic. Nothing dangerous, nothing meaningful. Just a woman who made things with thread while the rest of the world built real legacies. But real legacy doesn't fold when the paper arrives. Hers did. At some point that evening, Nolan left. I know this because Karen called, again. Said she saw him at the hotel lobby alone, sipping a bourbon, tie loosened. He looked distant. She tried to hug him for a photo, and he kind of stepped back. You could tell. Later, I heard what he told her before walking out. This wasn't a disaster, Celeste. It was a reveal. I didn't hear from him. Not directly. But that was fine. The beach was quiet that night, and I needed air that wasn't recycled by someone else's narrative. I took a walk by myself, my hands buried in my jacket pockets, the hem of my jeans dragging through the sand. Halfway down the shore, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small envelope. It was the wedding invitation. The one that arrived 3 weeks ago, white gold embossed with embossed initials and a wax seal I never broke. I didn't open it. I never had. I stood at the edge of the water and let the wind tug at the corners of the envelope, just enough to feel the tension between my fingers and the waves. Then I let it go. No speech, no tears. Just salt air, the sound of retreating water, and the soft thud of something meaningless meeting the sea. I didn't ruin her wedding. I just stopped pretending it belonged to all of us. The envelope disappeared into the waves without resistance, and I didn't look back. I stayed on the shore until the tide began to crawl up toward my shoes, then turned and walked home with my hands in my coat pockets and my head clear for the first time in weeks. That was a month ago. The apartment I moved into afterward is nothing special by Charleston standards. 2 bedrooms, lots of light, creaky floors in just the right places. The walls are white for now, though I've taped a few swatches in the hallway, unsure whether I want soft blue or green-gray. The kitchen is small but clean, and the windowsill above the sink gets just enough sun to keep basil alive. I hosted a housewarming last weekend. Not a big event, just Silas, Marshall, and 2 old friends who still remembered what my name sounded like in a conversation. We had pie instead of cake, wine instead of champagne. Nobody made a toast. Nobody needed to. We laughed about the heater making strange noises, and someone brought a plant I didn't know how to take care of. It felt easy. Real. A painting I finished last spring hangs near the living room window. It isn't of the house. I don't think I'll ever paint that house. It's of the shoreline I walked that night, done in soft strokes and muted tones. It isn't meant to impress anyone. It just exists, like I do. Tuesday morning, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. Inside, on a single sheet of notepaper, were the words, "I remember more than I ever said. I'm sorry for being silent when it mattered. No signature, but I didn't need one. I folded it carefully, slid it into the drawer next to my keys, and let it be. I didn't call her. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Some apologies weren't meant to rebuild anything. They were just acknowledgments, like flowers left at the edge of a grave. A few days later, I got a voicemail from Nolan. "I see you differently now," he said. "That's all I wanted to say." I deleted it without listening a second time. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need him to see me clearly anymore. I already did. Later that week, I framed 3 things and hung them in my hallway. First, the embroidery piece I had made for Celeste's engagement, this time reframed in oak, the stitching pressed smooth behind glass. Second, a copy of the letter Dad wrote me when I graduated college, the one I almost threw out years ago. Third, the certified copy of the house deed, my name clearly printed beside hers. I didn't frame them for spite. I framed them for remembrance. Not because I needed to prove anything to visitors. Honestly, most people will walk past them without a second glance. But because they remind me that what was real doesn't stop being real just because someone edits the narrative. I don't know what Celeste is doing now. I heard from someone that the hotel pulled out of her event partnership and that the firm she was consulting with politely paused their agreement. She hasn't contacted me, and I don't expect her to. I don't wish her harm, but I no longer wish her access either. People like her don't fall apart overnight. They rebuild fast, faster than we think, but not always wiser. The difference this time is, she'll have to do it without me propping her up from the shadows. As for Mom, I think that note was the most she could offer. Maybe she thought silence was safer. Maybe she thought love meant avoiding hard truths. Maybe she just wasn't capable of saying more. Whatever the reason, I no longer carry the weight of waiting for her to say it right. She tried. and I've let that be enough. This morning, I walked to the cafe around the corner and sat by the window with a book I never opened. The light poured in at an angle that made everything seem soft. I sipped my coffee slowly and watched people pass by, without feeling like I needed to be anywhere else. Home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's the absence of performance. Sometimes it's the quiet you choose, not the quiet you endure. Before I end this story, I want to say something from the heart, especially to those of you watching who felt unseen in your own family, unheard in your own home, or unvalued despite everything you've given. Here's what I've learned. Silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's wisdom. Sometimes it's strategy. But there comes a point when silence is no longer noble. It's erasure. And no one should be erased. You don't need permission to matter. You don't need a spotlight to have worth. And you certainly don't need to prove your story to those who've already decided not to hear it. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. Not to win the fight, but to stop being part of one that was never fair to begin with. So if you're at a crossroads, wondering whether to speak up, step out, or simply stop chasing validation, this is your sign. Take your space, write your version, and don't apologize for building something better than what broke you. Now let me ask you, have you ever been pushed to the edge by the very people you once protected? Have you ever had to reclaim your worth quietly, in a way no one saw coming? Tell me in the comments. I truly want to hear your story. If this video touched something in you, comment with a 1, or let me know where you're watching from. If it didn't resonate, that's okay too. Tell me why. Let's talk about it. And if this story meant something to you, if it made you feel seen, please hit that subscribe button. There are more stories coming, real ones, quiet ones that fight with truth, not noise. Thanks for spending time with me today. See you in the next story.